Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to get it right out right now. This is a video that is for the hometown crowd. Stick around if you are part of that. If you're going to stick around, otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to hear a lot of Washington conservatives air some dirty laundry. Why am I even doing this video? I recognize I'm stepping out of the lane a little bit. Well, in keeping with the true mission of Washington Gun Law, when it comes to any topic, we're not going to tell you how to think. We're just going to give you all the stuff to think about. I'm going to set up what happened here with a longer than normal introduction. But over the weekend, I was down in Las Vegas, and I am a retired drinker, so I was not drunk texting or anything like that. This is on me. But there was a particular tweet that came out. It was this one right here. And I'm only showing you the first part because I reacted to the first part of that tweet and then responded in a fashion that was in defense of a couple people who had been attacked in the previous post, that being Brandy Cruz, independent journalist Brandy Cruz, and then Jason Rance of KTTH, and then Fox News and all of that. Now, it started a very long discussion, which ultimately spun completely out of control, and I just kind of sat there and from the sideline at that point, keeping my mouth shut, just watching the carnage. But yeah, it even involved Brandy dropping a tweet with an F-bomb in it. It involved Dale Whitaker posting a very long, well-thought-out video in response to a lot that was going on. And I'm sitting there, and the more and more I saw everyone kind of, I don't know, coming unraveled a little bit, the sadder and sadder I got. And so I decided that, hey, I want to do this video because I want everyone to just kind of get some real talk. And this is what I mean by this, is that I just spent some time out in Illinois. And there is a wonderful woman out there named Rhonda Ezell. You guys might follow her on Twitter at Miss Ezell right there. If you don't, you should, okay? And what I love about Rhonda, not only is her story, but I love the fact that when she says real talk, that's exactly what she does. She gives it to you straight as is. And when you go out to Illinois, you realize that what Illinois struggles with and what Washington State struggles with is roughly the same thing. However, when you talk to all the people on the short end of the stick out there in Illinois, they have a much more realistic approach to what's going on. Instead, in Washington, we spend all of this time just kind of pointing fingers at each other. So today what we're going to do is we're going to have some real talk, a la Miss Ezell. We're going to have some real talk about why we maybe just don't succeed when it comes to statewide elections. So today, let's spend a few minutes, let's go through the numbers, and let's talk about maybe this is why the GOP can't win in Washington State. Okay, apologize for the length of the video here. I'm going to ramble probably a little bit, but I really do want to have some real talk with you. Now, before we get into this, I want all of you to ask yourself this question. How many of you, myself included, have spent the last week on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, whatever, watching absolutely all of the liberal meltdowns, right? It's been hilarious, okay? And what's been even more hilarious is to watch all of the talking heads on the mainstream media blaming the entire election results on things such as racism and misogyny. Karine Jean-Pierre even blamed it on the pandemic. When in fact, we all know that the reason Kamala Harris performed so miserably as a candidate is because she was a shill of a candidate and her policies, all coming from the Biden administration, were terrible policies. Okay, and that's why they lost, and that's why they lost big on a national level. And so we laugh at them when they come up with all of these excuses. But then I will point out that many of you on the conservative side in Washington have a tendency to point fingers at a lot of things and explain why we're getting our ass kicked all the time, okay? Because let there be no doubt, we are absolutely getting our ass handed to us in statewide races, okay? There hasn't been any close one in multiple election cycles. Why is that? Now, I know that some of you are going to say, well, they're cheating, okay? And I recognize that the mail-in balloting system is fraught with errors. I recognize that the Secretary of State here just changed the residency requirements and things like that. And so I'm not saying that you're barking up the wrong tree. What I am saying is I don't think they need to cheat to win, okay? Because I think they just flat out have the numbers. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about three things today. And again, I'm not trying to tell you how to think. I'm just giving you all the stuff to think about so that maybe we can all take a deep breath, figure out what the problem truly is, and then collectively work on a solution if one is even available. So we're going to talk about three things. Number one, the types of candidates that Republicans are nominating, because there's this huge struggle between, well, we need kind of a moderate candidate, or what some of you like to call rhinos, or a true conservative candidate, and in what some cases people like to call the true MAGA candidate. So we are going to talk about that. Number two, we are going to talk about Brandy and Jason for a brief moment, okay? And then number three, I'm going to tell you why I think we lose, okay? And again, I'm just going to use some numbers, and am I right? I don't know, but I think these are numbers that all of you should at least keep in the back of your head when you're trying to figure out why the heck are we always getting our ass handed to us. Okay, so the types of candidates. All right. Do we need to nominate much more middle of the road candidates that will have more statewide appeal, or should we shift back to the right and run more conservative candidates? Huge tug of war, a massive tug of war in the Dave Reichert versus Semi Bird race, okay? Huge tug of war. All right, now, why don't we just take a look at the two most recent examples to see, hey, which kind of candidate performs better in these situations? So we're going to take a look at this year's governor's race, and then we're also going to take a look at the governor's race 4 years ago, okay? Here's what we're going to find. As of the evening of November 10th, 2024, Bob Ferguson has 1,972,359 votes, or 55.7% of the vote. Dave Reichert currently has 1,559,657 votes, or 44.06%. And currently, Bob Ferguson leads Dave Reichert by 412,702 votes. Okay, so sorry to say, but that's a bit of an ass whooping, all right? Now, let's just go back in our time machine 4 years ago. One gentleman named Loren Culp, who we've had on this channel, I think he's a heck of a nice guy, okay, ran a campaign where she definitely ran as a conservative. Let there be no doubt that Loren Culp was running as a constitutional conservative. If you've ever had a conversation with him, you know that that is truly the type of person he is. Okay, now, how did Loren Culp do while running against Jay Inslee in an election cycle, I might add, that had a little bit more Democratic groundswell because of the huge anti-Trump sentiment? All right, how did they do compared to the other race? Well, Jay Inslee accumulated 2,294,243 votes, or 56.56% of the vote. Loren Culp received 1,749,066 votes, or 43.12%. and therefore lost that election by a total of 545,177. Okay, bigger margin of defeat. However, Loren Culp clearly accumulated more votes that year. I understand there are still votes to count in Washington, but this is what I also want you to understand, okay, is that Loren Culp's campaign, because I looked it up on the public disclosure request. Any of you guys can do it. It's not too difficult to find out. They had raised $3.33 million. I'm going to assume that Loren spent every penny of that, okay? Because that is not a significant amount of money to run a statewide gubernatorial campaign. It might be in a state like Delaware where you don't have as much real estate to cover, but $3.33 million. And he ended up with 1.75 million votes, okay? And roughly 43% of the vote. Okay, Dave Reichert's campaign raised $6.73 million, almost twice as much. I understand there's 500,000 kicking around, which makes no sense because you knew you were getting your ass kicked in the election and you didn't go all in. I don't know. So let's just assume that he does have 500,000 left over. Well, that means he still spent $6.23 million, or roughly $3 million more, almost twice as much as Loren Culp. And we saw an improvement in numbers like what? It's basically inconsequential. The numbers may actually turn out to be identical. And if you take a look at the sentiment of what was driving the national election as well, there really is no noticeable difference. And I will admit that I was one that truly did believe that a more moderate candidate would perform vastly better on a statewide election than a true conservative right-wing candidate. But you know what? The numbers simply don't bear it out. So if that were my opinion based upon the numbers that I've seen right now, I was wrong. So if it's not about the candidates, then what is it about? Well, what got me going down this rabbit hole was the tweet that suggested that maybe Brandy Cruz and Jason Rance had somehow or another contributed to this ass whooping that the GOP had taken. All right, let's talk about that for a minute. Now, if you notice, I'm blocking all of the names out on the Twitter accounts because I'm not trying to call anybody out here. It's not about who said it. It's about what they said, because I know there's a lot of other people that are thinking similar thoughts, all right? And so I'm just trying to have a conversation here, okay? Full disclosure. I've known Brandy Cruz for a number of years. We go way back to when she was working with Dory Monson and I was working for another law firm at the time. I've known Brandy for many years. We've had many, many conversations. Yes, she is not a real right-wing conservative. It is true. In fact, for much of her life, I think she probably leaned a little left, had a little bit of a red pill moment, but yeah, she's very middle of the road. Okay, now if you think that Jason Rance doesn't have a conservative political lean, I don't know where you would come in from, but here's the thing. And here's the thing, Washington GOP, Washington conservatives, whatever you want to call yourself. If you don't like your messengers, then get better messengers. Okay? If you, for whatever reason, don't think that your messengers are portraying your values, well, then you need to find different messengers. And as a matter of fact, the messengers don't necessarily have to be people in journalism. No, the messengers actually could be the people that you want to run for public office. And I will say this, that, if it weren't for individuals like Brandy Cruz, like Jason Rance, like Jonathan Cho, like Ari Hoffman, okay? Just like out there in Illinois, there's a guy named Greg Bishop doing the same thing. If it weren't for those independent journalists, if it weren't for the Dory Monsons back in the day, who actually would be exposing all of the shenanigans going on, and who would actually be trying to hold government accountable? So for any of you to think that a political structure could be undermined by a couple of journalists in Washington state who candidly speak from a conservative voice, then you just simply do not understand what the problem was. Okay? And again, if you want to come up with better messengers that more reflect the values of Washington state conservatism, whatever that is, and that's another problem. Apparently, there are certain groups in this state that for some reason seem to believe that they have been anointed the ability of how to determine who is a true conservative or not. And if Washington state, by the way, truly is the minority party, which is going to be the point of this video, well, then maybe your tent should be based on inclusivity rather than exclusivity. You want to know why? Because when it comes down to elections, it really comes down to two things. You guys can argue policy all you want. But campaign politics comes down to two things: votes and money. And the funny thing is you need the money to get the votes. So then, why do we lose, and why do we consistently seem to be getting our ass whooped even more? Well, let's go all the way back and let's go take a walk down memory lane in state governor races, because I do think that state governor races are a good bellwether to where your state sits on the political spectrum, okay? Now, we're gonna go back and we're gonna go all the way back to 2004, and I'm only gonna talk to you about this one for a second because my blood still freaking boils over this. But this was kind of the turning point in Washington state politics. And I know that many of you are gonna say this is when they started cheating, okay? But this is what I want you to think, no matter what corner of Washington you're in right now, okay? All right, here's what I want you to think about. Because I've traveled all over the state, I've lived in this state my whole life. If you live in Western Washington in the Puget Sound region and something like that, okay, and you got people that are moving into your neighborhoods and communities, where are they coming from? Where are they coming from? They're all coming from California, aren't they? Yeah, and they're bringing their crappy politics with them, okay? And how are many of them being brought into the community is through the tech field, okay? And I want you to think about what the tech field meant to Seattle and the Puget Sound region in 2004, and now think about what it means to us in 20 years later in 2024, okay? Now, if you live in Eastern Washington, you got all sorts of new neighbors, don't you? Yes, you do. But where do they all come from? They've all come from Western Washington, okay? They're just conservatives that moved out of the Puget Sound region and went to the Tri-Cities, went to Spokane, went to Whitman County, went to Yakima, whatever, and are enjoying, yes, a better quality of lifestyle. Unfortunately for all of them, Bob Ferguson will still be their governor. If you live in Southwest Washington, what are you getting there? California transplants, Oregon transplants, and not Oregon transplants from Southeast Oregon. No. You're getting an influx of Portland individuals. If you're up in the Whatcom County area, if you're out on the Olympic Peninsula, what are you getting out there? You're getting a whole bunch of new people, but where are they coming from? They're coming from the Puget Sound region, okay? So they're basically importing a liberal think tank out to these areas and it's being replaced again by people influxing into the Puget Sound region. And candidly, when you take a look at where Washington State sits from an industry standpoint, that's the types of individuals that our large industry is going to attract into the state. All right, so we start in 2004. What did the governor's race look like then? Well, it looked like a photo finish because Chris Gregoire got 1,373,361 votes, or 48.87%, and Dino Rossi got 1,373,232 votes, or also 48.87%. Yeah, it was 129 vote difference. Now, Dino was a good candidate, and Chris Gregoire was coming off as being the absolute worst attorney general in the history of Washington State up to that point. All right, so that governor's race, and yes, we're not going to talk about it, but I get it. There was a whole bunch of shenanigans, most of which came out of King County, but we are not going to talk about that. Now, we go to 4 years later, okay? 4 years later. Now, I should also point out at this point that this would be Barack Obama's first presidential campaign. And let us remember, there was a lot of energy, okay? You may dislike Barack Obama on his policies, but the dude ran a really good campaign in 2008, okay? Chris Gregoire got 1,598,738 votes. Dino Rossi got 1,404,124 votes. You beat him 53.24% to 46.76%. So the lead begins to widen. But again, you could chalk that up to, there was a little bit of a George W. Bush hangover. There was a lot of excitement about Barack Obama, but the lead has widened. But what happens 4 years later? Barack Obama's running for re-election, and there was a little less energy on the Democratic side because Obama had had a fairly rough first 4 years, okay? What did we get? Well, Jay Inslee comes into office with 1,582,802 votes, or 51.45% of the vote. Rob McKenna, 1,488,245 votes, or 48.46%. Rob McKenna lost that election by 94,577 votes. Okay, and listen, Rob McKenna was a good candidate, not a lot of energy, but a really, really sharp dude. He ran a good campaign. He lost by almost 100,000 votes. All right, then Jay Inslee runs for re-election. Now, how do the numbers look? In 2016, Jay Inslee got 1,760,520 votes, or 54.39% of the vote. Bill Byrd got 1,476,346 votes, or 45.61%, a deficit of 284,174 votes. Okay. Moving in the wrong direction. Why is that? Is it because Jay Inslee was such an amazingly good candidate and was doing such a fantastic job for the state of Washington? No. For all of you who lived in Washington State, go back and take a look at what was happening with your demographics, okay? Yeah, you might have had new people coming in, but they were just the conservatives that were escaping the Puget Sound region, okay? Yeah, you might have had a whole lot of new residents coming into the Puget Sound region, but where were they all coming from? And this is how the numbers begin to skew. What do we see the next election cycle? Well, that's when Jay Inslee got 2,294,243 votes, or 56.56% of the vote, and Lauren Culp got 1,749,066 votes, or 43.12% of the vote, but a deficit of 545,177 votes. And again, the gap widens. All right, now, take a look at what would happen between 2020 and 2024, because in that interim period of time, Washington State loses its freaking mind over the pandemic, okay? Jay Inslee goes on just a rampage and just takes away all rights, humanly possible, keeps the kids out of school. Bob Ferguson is cheering them along. So between that and the outrageous cost of living, the increase of crime and all of that, who of a conservative mindset at that point, in that 4-year window, would move to Washington State? You'd have to be out of your mind to move to Washington. I suppose if you were coming from California, there could be a mild improvement in some areas. But beyond that, there is no state you could come to if you were of conservative ideals that you would think that Washington State improves your quality of life. So you fast forward today to 2024. Bob Ferguson has 1.972 million votes, or 55.7%. Dave Reichert, spending a lot of money, has 1.56 million votes, or 44.06%, and he's down 412,000 votes and change. So Washington, maybe, just maybe, it's not about the candidates, and I can promise you it's not about Jason or Brandy, but what it probably is a simple numerical war, okay? We are outnumbered. Don't believe me? I think we're outnumbered by about 500,000 voting individuals. Why do I say that? We'll go back and look at every single one of our state races this year, and you will see that the Democrat won by approximately 500,000 votes. For those of you who want to criticize Jim Walsh, understand that I know him on a personal level. I think incredibly highly of Jim. I think Jim is tasked with trying to make chicken salad out of chicken. And then, of course, the individual that I had the initial exchange with pointed out that I had not read the whole post. That is true. And after drawing my attention to the rest of the post, what the point he wanted to make there is that, you know, if we really had supported Donald Trump as the GOP, if we had really run true all MAGA candidates, well, then the results would have been much different. Now, here's why I think that is a bunch of BS, okay? Because the numbers don't bear that out. Let's just assume in arguendo here for a second that a lot of people who are absolutely diehard Donald Trump supporters were really dismayed with the fact that Semi Bird didn't get nominated, or that there wasn't enough conservatism or MAGA conservatism amongst the state candidates. Let's just assume that in arguendo, okay? Are you telling me that they're still not going to go out and cast their vote for President Donald Trump? Because one would think that if they were true MAGA conservatives, they would, walk through, broken glass and fire to vote for Donald Trump. And certainly that is the loyalty he has amongst his base, okay? So then what we should see is radically different numbers at the presidential level than what we're seeing in the gubernatorial race, right? Because even though there was a big protest vote, I'm not voting for Dave Reichert, he's nothing but a rhino. Of course, all MAGA Republicans would go out and make sure that they voted for now President-elect Donald Trump, right? Well, wrong, because here's how the presidential race broke down on a statewide level. You see, Vice President Harris has 2,066,126 votes, or 57.6%. Donald Trump only has 1,393,054 votes, or 38.84% of the vote, which means he's actually getting beat worse than every single statewide Washington State GOP candidate. Every single one, okay? Now, again, if there's this huge hidden population in Washington State of MAGA Republicans, and again, I'm not being critical of MAGA Republicans, I'm just saying I don't think there's a whole lot of them in the state. Why do I say that? Well, because if we go back and we look at 2016, the first Trump wave, okay? The first big wave of MAGA Republicans. What happened in Washington State during that presidential election? Well, Hillary Clinton got 1,742,718 votes, or 54.3%. Donald Trump got 1,221,747, or 38.07%. Listen, I get the desire to run what some people want to label as MAGA conservatives. What that truly is, again, we get into this crazy gatekeeping that's going on inside the GOP right now. But the numbers clearly don't bear out that there is this large, unreported population of MAGA conservatives somewhere in this state. So Washington, what I need you to understand is that despite the fact that you want to point fingers here or point fingers there, in all likelihood, the answer is just sitting right in front of you. It's sitting right there in the numbers. And until we figure out a way to have a massive demographic shift inside the state of Washington, we are going to continue on this death spiral of election results. Okay, listen, thanks to everybody who contributed to this conversation. Again, I mean, no disrespect to any of them. I appreciate all of the input. I appreciate Dale Whitaker's input. I will tell you that I got to know Dale throughout the election season. I think incredibly highly of him. I want you to know, Washington, that Dale Whitaker is one of the smartest dudes I ever met, okay? And that is not overstating it, okay? This dude is razor sharp, okay? So listen, it's a good conversation. I want to hear from all of you, Washington. What do you think? What do you think the problem is? And what do we think the solutions might be? All right. Now, listen, in the meantime, if you got any more questions about this or anything else, you know how to get a hold of Washington Gun Law. If you don't, come on. It's all down there in the description box. If you got an idea for a video, you click on that link right there. You let us know. If you want to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, heck, you could have skipped ahead minutes ago and got to the end because that's all down there in the description box. And then finally, And most importantly, Washington, let's remember, first of all, that part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner is to know what the law is in every situation, how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. But most importantly, let's keep fighting, but let's keep fighting not with each other, but for each other, okay? Thanks for watching, and most importantly, stay safe.